should be recording. All right. So Dominic, do you want to give it one more minute for people to join, or do you want to get the ball rolling now?
That's a good idea. One more minute, and then we're going to get started.
All right. All right, we do have the links to the slide deck in the chat as well as on the screen, and I will be updating the chat with links as we go through. So you may want everyone to be sure you have something that you can copy paste these into. They're in the slide deck as well, but whatever is easiest for you. And I'm just going to relocate the cat. Oh, in front of the screen is not a very convenient place for you. There you go. You stay there. The joys of the home office. My coworkers do not listen to anyone. This is Toby. It's one of my coworkers. Off you go. Good boy. All right, Dominic, you ready?
I am ready. Let's get going.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us bright and early on your weekend. And thank you for joining us for the Social Studies Toolbox. And I'm sure you are wondering who we are. So we're going to do our quick round of introductions. So my name is Sarah. I wear many different hats for Logix, and my day job is working for the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And for most of this session, you are going to be in the capable hands of Dominic. So Dominic, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Dominic Tremblay. I'm a teacher from beautiful Belleville, Ontario. I'm Franco-Ontarian, but I work with teachers in English and French, and even recently had to do some work in Spanish. But I'm a big fan of using Lego bricks and pieces, and I also love to do inquiry-based learning, which will be the topic of our session today. We're going to have a look at how we can use those amazing Google tools to do inquiry-based learning in our social studies classroom. But also, if you teach other subjects, I'm sure those tools will be useful as well.
And I am super excited to see everything that you have to share. Now, as we begin, I do want to take a moment to pause and reflect on the fact that even though we're meeting in a virtual space, we are all meeting from very different real places. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge and pay respect to the fact that I'm presenting to you from the ancestral lands of the Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, which includes the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm descended from settlers who started coming over from England, Scotland, and Ireland about 150 years ago. And the last member of my family to cross the ocean was my paternal grandmother just after World War II. And because of the conditions surrounding how my family came to the lands now known as Canada, one of my resolutions is to try to make sure that I am living here in a good way. Dominic, did you have anything that you wanted to add? And I'm going to share the link.
And I think it's important to do a land acknowledgement, but also see how we can, move to action and get to know the people around us that are from the First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, and work in collaboration with the people in our communities.
Exactly. Well said. All right. And we are here from Logix Academy, and we will be sharing a few links later on if you enjoyed this session for other events that we have coming up. So do stay tuned in the chat and look out for those. And we want to say a huge thank you. We are so fortunate that we work with all of these amazing training partners to present all kinds of professional development. And we are super, super excited and grateful, and want to say a big, huge thanks today to Google and to Sandy for arranging this and for allowing us to be here today. And I am going to be spending most of my time monitoring the chat and answering your questions and forwarding them on to Dominic and making sure that all of your voices are heard. So on that note, I am going to turn the reins over to Dominic. It is all yours.
Thank you so much. And I want to start with getting your brain going, because as you know, when we do inquiry-based learning, students have to ask questions, they have to think. It's minds-on. It's not just getting information from the teacher, but it's also to start thinking. And as you can see, our workshop today is about the social studies toolbox, which is great if you teach history, if you teach geography, if you teach economy, if you teach any of the social studies courses. You will also see that it is great if you teach science. But one of the link that I like to make is with CSI. Kids usually are amazed by CSI, police investigation, crime scene investigation, and how they come up with all those clues and try to solve a mystery. And when we teach social studies, it's very similar, except that it's not a crime most of the time. So we have clues. When they go on a dig site, they have clues that they look at, and they have to come up with the story that is backed up by those clues. And in social studies, we always say you need to observe and infer. So you don't just make up a story. Your story has to be based on observation. So I'm going to start immediately with the warm-up. I have a police investigation for you. It's called a footprint puzzle, and it is appearing on the screen right now. As you can see, there's a police car. You see some footprint, you see a park, you see a school, and you also see a super ball, like those bouncy balls, and you see some glass fragments. So those words that may be a little bit too small on the screen, and I'm going to show it like a little bit bigger here. Those word says it's glass fragment, and there's a super ball, as you can see near the school right here. So what I'm going to ask you to do, and we're going to start working right now, I want you to look at this, observe and infer, and let me know, what do you think happens? Try to build a story from the past, because this is the past, from just the footprint puzzles that you see here, those clues that you see on the screen. I'm going to give you about a minute to think about it. If you have colleagues around you, that would even be better. If you want to shout out some ideas by turning on your microphone, that's also a possibility. And then when you have a story that fits the situation here, you can type it in the chat, and you can also turn on your microphone and let us know. Now, one thing to keep in mind is any story needs to be based on observation, and it also can be based on prior knowledge. You have some knowledge that can help you solve this mystery. And that's what police investigation will do. And that's what historian, archaeologists, this is what they will do when they come up to a scene and they need to rebuild the story. I'm going to give you some time to do it.
This is a very, very cool puzzle.
Yeah, and because you have the Google slide that was provided to you, you can use it in your classroom as well.
That is so much fun. I love when I get to take things away from professional development. It's like a goodie bag.
Yeah. And if you're thinking, where are the Google tools in that? They're coming. We're going to start discussing the Google tools after about a 15 minutes introduction to inquiry-based learning. And then we're going to have a look at how these tools just fit the puzzle.
It's another crime scene starting right here. Stop it. Normally he's pretty good, but he really wants to be in front of the screen. I think he's very into your slides, Dominic.
I think he loves the crime scene investigation. So looks like we have about a minute past right now. So in the classroom, I would give students a little bit more time, but you don't want to give them too much time, because then there's time wasted. You want to give them enough time to look at the clues, properly observe, and try to come up with the story. So do we have anyone who would volunteer to either turn on their microphone or type some sort of a story that would match our clues here? So while you're doing that, we already have one. So do you mind reading it to me, Sarah? The
Yes.
one that just showed up in this chat here?
All right. The police jumped out of the car and followed the footprints around the bush. They found the criminal and led him back to the police car, as there are 2 sets of footprints leading back to the car.
Awesome. So we have part of the story here. We do see footprints leaving from the driver's side, and we assume in this case that the driver is on the left-hand side of the car and not the right-hand side. So that would fit with North American kind of police trooper cars. And then we see two set of footprints. So that explained this part where it seems like the footprints are bringing back the criminal back to the car. Now there's more footprint, and I want you to look at the footprints near the school and near the, like from the school going to the bush. And as you can see, some of the observation that students will make is the distance between the footprints, the size of the footprint. Oh, maybe it's a smaller child or a teenager, or maybe it's an adult based on the size. And you can also assume the speed at which they're going by looking at the distance between the footprints. And that's the kind of things that students will use when they solve this mystery here. So
That's really
anyone who would like to attempt an explanation about the school part of this investigation? So I don't see anything in the chat right now. Does it look like we have a hand raised or someone wants to turn on their microphone, Sarah?
I'm not seeing it. I think everyone's just
Maybe it's
doing
you
it
still
this
need
morning.
one more shot of espresso this morning. I'm going to tell you what I hear from students. So from students, they will usually say that kids was playing with the bouncy ball, and they assume it's a kid or teenager because why would an adult play with a bouncy ball? So that's based on prior knowledge. Sometimes we make assumptions that may not be true, so we have to be careful. But they usually say it might be a kid or teenager playing with a bouncy ball, and then they hit the window. That's why we see glass fragment. And then that kid start running and hide behind the bush when it says the police trooper. The police saw him or her. And it's interesting. Sometimes they're going to say it's a him because a girl would never do that. So we do have gender bias sometimes in their explanation. And then the rest of the story is what Caroline told us. If this is the story that your students come up with, it is actually false. And it all has to do with the position of the glass fragment. And I also like to bring a bit of science to my workshop. So if I was to throw a bouncy ball towards a window, the glass fragments would have been inside the school. The fact that they are outside the school means the ball came from the inside of the school. So this is just to show the students when they do inquiry-based learning, how careful they need to be and observe every single little things. And also, sometimes teachers tell me inquiry-based learning is not good because there's not enough content. We put too much emphasis on the skill and the research and asking questions and answering questions, but we don't do enough content. And this is just to show you that content is still relevant. It is still important. You need the content to know, you need this scientific knowledge to know that the ball would be coming from the inside. So that poor kid that is being arrested here, and we assume he's being or she's being arrested, is probably just a bystander that went into the window, looked what was happening, saw the fragment, saw the police, and was afraid that he would get in trouble for breaking the window. And that's the rest of the story. So this is just one of the little footprint puzzle that I like to use, just to bring the idea of how careful we need to be when we find artifacts in social studies, when historians find artifacts, to properly rebuild the story and look at all the details. And this is why sometimes we have to change the story about the past because we realize that we made mistakes when we were interpreting the story. So now I have some questions for you. When you did this activity, what kind of knowledge did you need? What kind of prior knowledge did you need? And what kind of skills did you need to do that? So I invite you to type them in the chat. What kind of skills were necessary to solve a problem like that? And what kind of knowledge was also necessary to complete this investigation? So Sarah, you're going to be checking the chat for me.
Yep.
I've already given you one answer. One of the prior knowledge that we needed to know was knowledge about physics and how projectiles work and how broken glass works when it is hit by a projectile. So that's knowledge. So, yes, I see reasoning.
Observation and
I
reasoning.
see observation, totally. Being able to observe, to infer, to reason, all of these things are skills that you need. And you need to be a very careful observer to properly run those investigations. So that was just my quick introduction. Now that we're ready to get to inquiry-based learning, I just want to differentiate between project-based learning and problem-based learning. A lot, and what's funny is they have the same abbreviation. It's PBL. Um, a lot of teachers says I do a lot of projects in my classroom. The problem is we focus on the project. Oh, they're going to be creating a dance, or they're creating a recipe, or they're going to produce a video. They're going to create a podcast. That is okay, but it's focusing too much on the product. What is the final product? I like to do with my students problem-based learning, where we have a problem, and then it doesn't matter what kind of products my students want to use to communicate at the end. What I'm focusing on is on the problem. And you're going to see a lot of the things that we're going to be discussing today will be the problem and seeing how we can use those Google tools to solve these problems. And then they can use whatever they want as a product. So I will never force my students to say, hey, right now we're doing a video. Right now we're doing a podcast. Right now we're doing a written report or a pamphlet, that kind of thing. No, we focus on the problem, and I give a variety of choices for my students to decide on what the product would be. Another thing that is important in an inquiry-based classroom is to consider your students as historians, geographers, economists, archaeologists. Your students are not students of history. They're not geography students. They're not economy students. You want them to act like a real historians. So instead of studying history, they're going to do history. The same way as an historian would collect clue, ask questions, try to infer, and come up with answers. So that's going to be the whole focus of using the Google tools today. Another important part of our inquiry-based learning, before we move on to the tool, is to look at the different levels of inquiry. I have teachers who tell me, I do a lot of inquiry because my students are active. They do science experiments in the science classroom. They look at data in history. The problem is sometimes you're at a level that is a little bit too low. Confirmation inquiry would be an example. Let me give you an example. Let's say I want my students to study how political views change in different provinces in the country. I'm going to ask them the question, then I'm going to give them a method. I'm going to tell them we're going to collect tweets, and I don't think we call them tweets anymore. We call them X. So I'm going to collect social media publications or posts from across the country. I'm going to group them by province, and then I'm going to look at the vocabulary and try to find the keywords that are the most frequent in each provinces, and then try to categorize them. And then ahead of time, I tell them which provinces are leaning more towards the left, which provinces are leaning more towards the right, and which provinces are leaning more towards the central view. In this case, they already know the answer ahead of time. I gave them the answer, and they do the inquiry just to confirm what they already know. That's boring. Then the second step is a structured inquiry, where I bring a question to my students. Let's say I want my students to have a look at water accessibility in communities across Canada. I'm going to give them the question, and then I'm going to give them a method. I'm going to say, you're going to create a survey that you're going to send to so many people, and you're going to collect data, and you're going to do this and that. But I don't tell them the answer. I don't tell them where do we find non-drinkable water across Canada. I let them find out the answer. That's a little bit better because they at least have the fun of finding the answer. The next one is a guided inquiry, where I start them on a question. It's like, what do breakfasts across the world look like? And that's it. I don't give them a method. I don't give them the answer. They have the fun to find which tool will be the most useful. See, I'm starting to talk about the tools. They're coming very soon. The last one is open-ended, and that's my favorite. In my other life, I work for the Canada-wide Science Fair. All our inquiry at the Canada Wide Science Fair are open-ended. Students choose their own topic. The questions come from their own curiosity. And that's amazing. So students will come up with a question, they come up with a method, a strategy, some tools to answer the question, and then they find their own answer. Now, I know we have a curriculum to cover, whether it be the Quebec Progression of Learning, the Ontario curriculum, the BC curriculum. We have a curriculum to cover. Sometimes there's some topics that we need to cover. So how do we deal with open-ended? And the trick is to use what I call a spark. You bring something or trigger, something that will trigger the students or spark their attention, and they're going to start asking questions. And in the next few minutes, we're going to have a spark that we're going to do together. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you do inquiry, you want to have a gradual release of responsibility. So see, you start from teacher-centered and you move to student-centered. And if you look at my chart here, confirmation inquiry, it's very teacher-focused, whereas open-ended is very student-focused. If you start, let's say you are grade 2 teachers, you may have to go with structured inquiry. Let's be realistic, and then start moving them towards the open-ended. Sometimes it's difficult to start with open-ended at first. If they've never done it, they wait for instructions from their teachers. But in schools that I've implemented inquiry-based learning, students are getting more and more familiar and at ease with the idea of coming up with their own questions, creating their own method, and then finding their own answers. And I really like to use this chart, which you have in the Google slide that was provided to you. And I'm sure Sarah will put the link more and more in the chat because some of you just joined. It is all the skills that kids need to do inquiry. Like we've already mentioned, observing and questioning and inferring, but students will need to use instrument. They will need to gather data. They will need to plan. They will need to classify, compare and contrast. That's one that we do all the time in science and social study. You need to compare and contrast, being able to see trends as well, to analyze. All of these things we do in an inquiry. And this is actually from the Smarter Science framework, but I've used it so much in history and geography, it just fits perfectly. It is not only for science. So these are some of the skills, and each skills is a puzzle piece. What I suggest is that you print this poster, and when your students are in your classroom doing inquiry and you see them use a skill, point to it so that they can start having the vocabulary of that. So like right now, oh, you're questioning, and you point to questioning. You're defending, you point to defending. Oh, you're discussing right now. Oh, right now you're gathering data. It's extremely important to do that. And the cool thing about those process skills is they're transferable. They're transferable to any subject, and they also build literacy and numeracy. As you can see, skills like observing and questioning and searching are more literacy focused, whereas skills like measuring and calibrating and recording and drawing a graph are more numeracy based. So now that we're here, time for you to get active. I want to show you a trigger that I use in my classroom. And just so that I'm clear, a trigger is what you use to get the interest of your students. You get them interested. You do have a pedagogical intention. You have a plan. There's an expectation from my curriculum right now that I want to cover with this trigger. But the students will be asking the questions. And I want you to start being immersed by my trigger, by my spark. So when I give you a chance to ask questions, you have so many questions in your head. So let's get our minds on. We're not just listening right now. Minds on. I want to introduce you to this beautiful platform, the country called Sealand. And as you can see, the Sealand flag is flying above the platform on the ocean, and you actually see the word Sealand on the right-hand side here. Sealand has stamps, so it's a great country. You can use stamps to mail stuff from Sealand, and Sealand, as you saw on the platform, as a flag. And in the classroom, I would actually try to bring the object. In virtual, I have to do it with a slideshow, but in the classroom, I would actually bring like real stamps, so to get them even more interested and intrigued by this. And I would ask all my students to stand up for the national anthem of Sealand. Obviously, limited time today. With our limited time, I won't play the anthem. I'm going to switch to our next slide. But it is so true that we have a great country here that if you look on Google Music or any music sharing platform, you will find the complete national anthems of the world. And on the album, on volume 7, in the S, you will find Sealand. So it is a country. There's the king and the queen. This is their football team, or as we call in Canada, their soccer team. And this is money. This is their currency. You have money from Sealand, and in the classroom, I would actually bring the coins so they get to manipulate and look at them. And this is a Sealand passport. And on the right-hand side, you have a regular passport that has been stamped by Sealand. You can even get a deed and own part of Sealand. And just to be 100% real, there's actually a YouTube video called The World's Smallest Nation. Wow, this is a great country. So this is the introduction I would do in my classroom. A little spark, 10 minutes, grab their attention. And then students start asking questions. Mr. Trombley, is that a real country or are you pranking us? Like, what's the minimum size to be considered a country? That platform, can it be a country? Can anyone just create a country? Could I just build a platform myself and call it a country? This is the kind of questioning and critical thinking that we start to see in the classroom. Students will ask questions like, what defines a country? Has Sealand sent athletes to the Olympics in the past? Like we saw their football team. Has the football teams participated in the Olympics or other international competition? If I go to the bank, can I deposit those coins and get money in my bank account? Would it be recognized? If I have a Sealand passport, could I travel everywhere? That's the kind of question that students will start asking. And hopefully you have tons of questions that you have. So that's why I put all of these questions here. Now, some students may struggle by asking questions. So I will use dice and I will have the 6 question words. So when they throw it, they get a word like how, where, when, what, who, why. That helps them create questions about the situation that I just presented. I will also have a second one that would be is, did, can, would, will, and might. So they can combine where, can, and then they say, where can I get a passport? Who is the king of Sealand? So they can use this to help them if they have a hard time asking questions. Now, what I want you to do, and Sarah's going to put a link in the chat. We have a Jamboard, which is a Google tool. Keep in mind that it is a Google tool that will exist until the end of 2024, but they are retiring a Google Jamboard. But we're going to be using it today. It's a great tool to do some sort of a brainstorm. I want you to start thinking about all the questions. Like one could be like, where do they get their food? Does it get delivered by boat, by plane, by helicopter? That would be question. Try to act as a student and come up with as many questions as possible. And I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I'm actually going to share the Jamboard so that I can start seeing your great questions and answers. So give me a second. Okay, so you should have access to it. I see some of you there. So the way you use a Jamboard is you will use the Post-it notes right here, and you're going to start asking a question. Where do they get their food from? Yep. And here we go. So I want you to start asking questions. I know there's many of you in the workshop, so feel free to ask your questions. What is the GDP? So see, this is a concept that we need to learn in history and geography and economy. That's great that you mentioned that. Excellent. What countries does it border with? Hi, Sandy. Welcome. We're just doing a little brainstorm here about our spark that we just discovered. Oh, yeah. Is there taxation? Yeah, and I like the question, what does their flag look like? And some students that may have seen the flag because I brought it in the classroom may ask, like, what's the meaning of the flag? Like in Canada, there's meaning to having the maple leaf on the flag. What is the meaning of their flag? So while you're doing this, I just want to mention that this is how we get the questioning going. Kids have tons of questions. And the more you get them to practice asking questions, the more questions you will get. And that's the beginning of an inquiry, asking questions. Now, we're going to move in a minute to the tools. There are tools that students can use to answer these questions. And what I found is when I created the social studies toolbox, I realized that kids are amazing at asking questions, but they really have a hard time finding ways to answer these questions. So that's why I created the toolbox. So my introduction was to show you what inquiry-based learning is, what is the questioning, but then in the second part of the workshop, what are the tools that students can use to properly answer these questions? Because if you remember my slide, I told you in an open-ended inquiry, students need to ask questions, which you are doing right now. They need to come up with a method. They need to come up with a strategy to answer this question, and then they need to find their answer. Well, that's the part that was difficult, finding the strategies. The kids were not equipped to answer those questions. So, great question that I see here. Students are often concerned about their soccer team or football team. Like, where do they practice? This platform is so small. Kids are also interested in, is there cell phone signal? Is there internet on that platform? Like, they have so many questions. Now, the reason I'm bringing this one, it's one that I use often. And to me, it's to teach the difference between a micronation and a micro country. So some of them, there are countries like Vatican that are recognized by the international community, yet they are small. But there's some countries that are not recognized by the international community, and this Sealand is one of them. So Sealand think they are a country. They like to act like a country, but they are not recognized by the international community, which doesn't make them a country. So I would cover my curriculum expectation about the difference between micronation, micro countries, and I would get students to ask a lot of questions. Okay, so before I move to the toolbox, Sarah, do we have any comment or questions in the chat? Because now I want to move to the toolbox.
Not yet. Looks like everybody was giving their attention to the Jamboard and the questions there.
That's awesome. So the social studies toolbox is a set of tools that I came up with back in 2015. And it was created in French for French schools. So if you want access to the French version, there is a link, and Sarah is going to put it there. So if you teach in French immersion or French first language school, you can have access to the toolbox and all the videos that explain the toolbox. Now, I recently started using it in English school. So what I've done is I created a little translation of the toolbox that you see on the screen here. It is a series of 10 tools for students to start answering questions. In the last half hour of this workshop, we're going to go through some of these tools and see how they match some of Google tools. Because when I created the toolbox, it was not originally for a Google project, but then I realized, wow, most of the tools that I use are actually from Google. So that was a great topic to introduce this morning. So some of the tools: photographs, painting, and drawings, interactive maps, recent and old newspaper, database and statistics, artifacts and replica, interactive panoramas, interviews, surveys, social media updates or posts, and then internet trends. So those are the 10 tools. And when students have all these questions, they decide to answer a question, they would choose one or more of these tools. You will see in the Google slide, I have icons that I created for each of these tools. I encourage you to use them and give them to your students. Like, give the image file, so when they complete their project, they can visually show which of the tool they selected to answer their question. So let's start with one of my favorite. I'm from the generation where I would need to go to the public library or the university library to get old newspaper. And you know how they would come? They would come on microfiche. How, how old school is that? They had to scan and photograph all these newspaper and put them on little cards that you would put in a machine that would enlarge them. That's old school. That's why Google has been amazing at scanning all these old newspaper and giving us access. Even better, they are searchable. So when your students want to answer historical question and they need to go back in the past and look at that, it is a great tool. So I'm going to live demo Google Newspaper. I know Sarah put the link in the chat. Thank you so much. I'm going to load it up on my screen, and it's time to start having fun. What kind of project I would do with that? Like what kind of question? Let me give you a few examples as I'm loading the website here. One idea would be I want to see how women were viewed in the past and their role in society compared to today. So I could go and have a look at the ads that we see in those newspapers. Or maybe I want to do some research on the evolution of cigarettes and the kind of ads that do not exist anymore, but what they look like at the time. One that I did with my students is they realized that La Saint-Jean-Baptiste, which is the Francophone festival on June 24th, has changed definition over the years. It has now become the Quebec Day, the Quebec National Day, but it used to be different than that. So it's great to go back in time. And as you can see this newspaper, 1974, I didn't even exist with this newspaper. There's a lot of newspaper in English, in French, in Spanish. So if you want, you can grab like an old newspaper. Let's say I'm going to grab a super old one, 1945. And you can actually view it and you can do some research in it. You can zoom in. But see, you can go and have a look at things. So you could go back to a specific date. If you know an event that happened on a specific date, you could go and see, like one of my inquiry could be, compare different newspaper from the US and Canada and see how different views of an event were depending on where you're from. So that could be my inquiry. Remember, when you do an inquiry, students need to compare, contrast, analyze trends. They're not just finding newspaper and reading the newspaper. They need to collect data and maybe compare from different provinces, from different newspapers, from maybe see how the Anglophones and the Francophones newspaper were covering the same events in different ways. Like that would be so much fun. Sometimes I'm on my tablet in the bathtub and I just load Google Newspaper, and I love going back in the past and seeing what I see there. Like this is pretty cool. This is like an old school car. So students have access to that. Now, when I say it is searchable, let's say I'm interested in studying the moon landing. Oops, I didn't type it properly. It did recognize it, thanks to Google that autocorrect for me. But as you can see now, I can go back in time and read articles about the moon landing and see what it was. So if you're from Ontario and you teach science grade 6 and science grade 9, boom, you can go back in time and see how the event was covered at the time. Now, as a teacher, one thing that I really enjoy is you can send a link to your students, and you can send a link to a specific page and a specific article in the newspaper as well. So that's super useful if you want to show something to your students. Maybe let me go back to what we were saying. Let's say I want to create a structured inquiry. A structure, I provide the question and I provide the strategies, but I let the student find the answer. So I could pre-target some of the articles that my students would be comparing. Okay, so did you have a chance to see something in Google Newspaper that surprised you, that was pretty cool?
I just love that this is a tool that exists. This is new to me, and I'm just like,
It is one
it
of
blows
the
my mind.
it is one of the least well-known tools on Google that I find. Now, keep in mind that if you want news that are a little bit more recent, you will need to go to your regular Google page, and you can access the news from there. Now, a lot of students don't realize when you're on google.com, let's say, let's say I want to do an inquiry on COVID. Okay, so I'm going to search for COVID, and then I'm going to specifically research news. But let's say I want to compare the views in the early pandemic to the views in the late pandemic. So what I could do is I can come here and I can choose a custom range. I could say I want article from this date to this date, and then read a bunch of article, then read article from that date to that date, and then compare them. That would be a cool inquiry. See what I mean by inquiry? Your students are not, an inquiry is not just a research project where students copy stuff on Wikipedia and just give it to you and paraphrase it or use ChatGPT. Uh, an inquiry is students collecting data, analyzing it, seeing trends. This is what I mean by an inquiry. So all good? Any questions that I've shown in the chat?
Not so far.
Okay, so let me move back to our PowerPoint and we're going to explore our next tool. Obviously, we won't have time to do the 10 tools, and that's not my point today. I just want to give you a quick overview, and for today, I selected the ones specifically that go well with our Google tool. So the second one is interactive map, and you've probably all used Google Maps in the old days, and I'm from this age where we would need to have road maps in the car. And my parents were sailors, so we had marine maps. And then in my geography class, we were looking at the topography of the land. So we were using maps for that. And you also have tourist map that will focus on tourist attraction. So many different types of maps. These days, everything is on our phone, on our device, on our tablet, and you have access to it anywhere. And all of these maps are layered. Now, I also want to show you another tool, which is not only Google Maps, but Google My Maps. So let me spend some time to show that to you. So I'm going to back here, and we're going to go back here on Google Maps. Okay, perfect. Should show up in a second. Here we go. So now you all know where I live because the GPS pointed to Belleville. That's okay. So this is Google Maps. You're all used to it. And you know that with Google Maps, you can do search. You can search for direction. You can do all of these things. You can save things. And you can also, by using these different views here, you can add layer. You can all do all of these things. You can have transit information. You can display museum, hotels. Google Map is a great tool. But for the social study toolbox, I want to focus also on Google My Maps. And let me make sure that we see it on the screen. So I'm going to share the Google My Maps. Here we go. So this is what Google My Maps is. And this is also another tool that I find is not very well known by teachers. Google My Maps lets you create your own maps. So if I go create a map here, you now have Google Map, but with the power of adding something. So as an example, my students that are studying, let's say, Samuel de Champlain or Jacques Cartier when they came to Canada from France, they could actually use the tool like the drawing a line here, and they could start drawing a line and maybe show where they landed and show their trip and maybe their trip up to Saguenay and all of this. Let me stop it here and let me just call it Explorers. Okay. Probably not fully accurate here. Students will need to do some research. But see, I have now the official distance that they've covered. And the cool thing is students can add text here. They can also add pictures. So they can search for pictures. So they could document a whole trip by using Google My Maps. And you can give names to your different maps, and they're going to save on your Google Drive. The same thing as you would do with any Google Docs. So they can then share this map with the rest of the world. As an example, on my website as a teacher and as a consultant, I created a Google My Map that shows all the places that I've worked as a consultant. And now I embedded this map that I created. I also created a map of my favorite restaurants so that I can share it with my friends. So when they travel to the same location as me, they know which restaurants I thought were super cool. Now, let me show you some other stuff that I've seen students do. So students were studying Francophone schools in Canada. And there's a way to import data here. So you can import data from other sources. So in a few seconds, they had a map of French schools in Canada, and they could see where you have more French schools and where you have less French schools in Canada. So that's an example of a project. Then they can start to see trends. You can also, as you are adding stuff, and actually let me create a map here just to show you what we can do. I'm going to call it participants to the Google Summit. Okay. And now I'd like to know where you guys are from. And I think, Sarah, we've already started collecting this information. I'm going to add myself first. And then if you, Sarah, you can get that information for participant. I'm going to put Belleville here, which is my location. And I'm going to say add to map. So now this is added to the map, and I can say, well, Belleville, that's Dominic that is living here. Okay. And I can even add a photo of Dominic if I want. So I can go online, look for a photo of Dominic. That is also possible. Okay, so I could look for photos and put a photo of myself and save. Now, I don't want to go to that point right now, but where do we have people? So we have Caroline from Waterford, Ontario. And I'm going to add it to the map. So this is Caroline's.
Like, Caroline is Waterford, Ireland.
Oh, Ireland. Oh, I need to change that. I'm going to just delete this, and that's even more fun. Thank you.
And we have
Okay.
Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Excellent. So I'm going to add this. And as you can see, that's Caroline from Waterford. There we go. And then who do we have from Manitoba?
Owen. A-W-I-N.
A-W-I-N. Oh, no. So I need to search. What's the city in Manitoba?
Winnipeg.
Oh, Winnipeg. Okay. And that's Owen. Perfect. Okay. And then who do we have? We have.
Thank you to everyone who shared that so far.
Okay. So I'm going to search for Toronto, and I'm going to add you. Okay, here we go. So just to show you quickly, I now have a map that has all those pins. So we can have a quick overview of where participants are from. You could then create layers. So I could say, and I'm going to make it up right now just because we don't have much time, but let's say I'm going to put high school teachers, and then I'm going to put elementary school teachers. So I'm going to add a layer, and I'm going to say here, this is going to be for elementary school teachers. Okay. And so now I have two layers. Let me delete this one. So now I could say, okay, Awan is elementary school and Dominic is elementary school. And let's say Caroline and Sarah are from high school. So as you can see now quickly, I can have my two layers, and I could even change the pin. So I could say I want a uniform styles for these pins, and I can look at the color. I can change the color of these pins. You can totally, like, let me put them like orange. So now I can compare where the orange pins and the blue pins are, so you can look for data. So it's a great tool. And as you can see, I'm just like quickly touching what you can do with this. But when it comes to compare, contrast, find trends, obviously we have a very small sample here. But imagine we have a large sample. We can see trends. We can hide one layer. We can show it back. It's a great tool to do social studies and do this inquiry. You can even, let's say I'm going to quickly do one last demo with the Google My Maps. So I'm going to add a line and I'm going to create a shape. And I'm going to do it rough for now, just because in the interest of times, we are pretty limited. I'm going to do it rough. Boom, 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 boom. Here we go. Boom. This is Greenland. One of the cool things that you can do is you can actually, and I see now I see the square meters. So I see the surface area, and I also see the border, how long the border is. So students can do some research with that, but students can also move things. And then they realize, oh my God, Greenland looks so small, but it's actually like the size of Saudi Arabia, or it's like smaller than Brazil. Doesn't look smaller than Brazil, but this is because of the size of the map, or the way the map is done. It's a sphere that now becomes a rectangle. So there's so many things that you can do. If you speak French, I do encourage you to watch those videos that I created that explain how you can use these tools in full details. Now, let me go back to some more tools in the toolbox, because these were interactive maps. And as you can see, there's so many things you can do with interactive maps when it comes to inquiry-based learning. Let me go back to our slideshow here. And the next one is finding trends. And there's a great tool that I also find is not as used as much by teachers, and it's called Google Trends. So you would find it on trends.google.com. Let me share that for you. So that's going to be our live demo of Google Trends. And as you can see, we have those icons that show that to you. So there's Google Trends. And when you are on Google Trends, you can actually do some search. And basically what Google Trends does is it looks at everyone that searched things on Google, and it collects data about it. So let's say I'm interested in learning about COVID and see when people were searching about COVID. So I'm here, and as you can see, I can see a graph of when people were looking at COVID. I'm going to say I want to go back 5 years. That would be interesting. And as you can see, I see when the interest started. That's in February. So it's before March when everything got shut down. And I can see that the interest is kind of dying right now. No more. Not a lot of people are looking about COVID. But what's interesting, I can also look at provinces and see which of the provinces. See, Nova Scotia seems to be a province where a lot of people are interested by COVID. And keep in mind, it's going to take the population into account as well. So Nova Scotia doesn't have as large of a population as Ontario, so it's going to be based on that as well. It's going to take this into account. And then you can see associated subjects like vaccine, diagnosis, and symptoms, and that kind of thing. And one thing that is pretty cool is scientists actually use this to see where outbreaks are coming up. If people search a lot for symptoms, like I have a runny nose and I have, a dry throat, and they see that, oh, in this region, a lot of people are searching for that, there might be an outbreak. So it is used a lot to do research, and students can start asking a lot of questions about the results that they get. Let's say I go here, and this, if I remember well, goes all the way back to 2004. So before 2004, so from about 1998 to 2004, there was no information that was collected. But see, no one was searching for COVID before that. So from 2004 all the way to 2019, February 2019, or February 2020 is when it started. You can even go further. So let's say I go in Quebec. I can have a look at the different region and see which region did search for that as well. So it's a pretty cool tool to start asking questions and wondering about things that are happening in history and geography. It's great if you teach economy, if you teach political studies, if you teach the civics class in grade 10 in Ontario. Amazing. Students can search, like try to see platform, and I'm sure politicians use this to come up with their platform and making sure that they take into account the interest of people around the country. Let's go with something like carbon tax. It's in the news a lot these days. And this is less than a day. So let me go, let's say the last 5 years. and see, I see when the peak of interest were, and then I can actually match this with Google newspaper and see were the article in newspaper at that time that had to do with the carbon tax. And then I can see the Saskatchewan and Alberta are provinces, Newfoundland as well, produce petrol. So students can try to explain the results that they get from that. And even if I go, like, let's say in Alberta, I can see which regions are more interested in the subject. So this is using Google Trend, just a quick overview of what you can do with that, but I want you to play, like all these tools today, I want you to spend some time and play with them after the workshop, because this is just a quick overview. In the interest of time, I also see we only have about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to introduce the last few tools. Some of these tools you already know. I just want to show you how we use them in an inquiry-based learning aspect. So panoramas, I use Google Street View. And you know, when you are on Google Maps, you can move to the Street View where you get to see everything that's around you. I use this a lot myself when I go to Toronto and I want to find parking before I get there. So I know where the underground parking will be. I look around, but it can also be used in social studies. So without going into the panoramas, some of the use that we've done, I have students comparing farms in Canada versus farms in Kenya or in Congo. I have students looking at what the street sign looks across the world. See, students can compare, they can contrast, they can look at trends. Another one that my students did recently using panoramas is to see the spread of electric cars. So they actually visited parking lots in different Canadian cities, Toronto, Vancouver, Ottawa, Montreal, trying to see where they would find more electric cars. So they actually look at the cars and they collect data. So this is a way to do it. The other one is surveys. That was part of the toolbox. Surveys is sending questions to the public. Let me give you a quick example here. I have students who were interested in food across the world. They wanted to know what people were eating for breakfast. So they created a survey asking questions, but also at the end of their Google form, so they're using the Google form tool. And if you've never used Google Form, it's a survey tool as part of Google to ask questions and then to collect a picture of their breakfast. So I use my social media to spread the word about this Google form that they created, and we received hundreds and hundreds of submissions from across the world. And then again, we come back to the tools of inquiry. They were comparing, they were contrasting, they were finding trends. Where do we see more fried food? Where do we see more grains? Where do we see more fresh foods and vegetables for breakfast? I also had students who were looking at opinion when it comes to policies as part of their course in civics. So looking at political parties, so they use a survey. Another thing that is used is the interviews, and I highly recommend using Google Meet, which we're using right now, to interview, because it used to be difficult to get people who have the expertise and interview them because they were living far. Now we have access to them using Google Meet. So I have students having meetings with people across the world to collect data. And we've mentioned the First Nation, Métis and Inuit when we started. That would be a great tool to also meet the elders and get some of their traditional knowledge and integrate that in their inquiry. So I feel like having access to a video conference tool just makes things so much easier. I also like to do mystery class, where I have a class somewhere in the world, and I've arranged that, and we meet on Google Meet, and my students are only allowed to ask yes/no questions, and they have to guess where the mystery class is located. The other tools, I won't spend much time just because they're not necessarily associated with a Google tool, but using photograph, paintings, and drawings. Artifact and replica, you will find more and more online if you search on Google Images. 3D version of artifacts, most museums have them available as a collection that they can view in 3D and can even 3D print them. So a lot of artifacts that students can explore. database and statistic, whether it be the Weather Network, Environment Canada, or any database that is available online for students to study, and social media updates. I love this one. We always think social medias are bad for kids, but I'm going to give you one last example. I had students who were interested in the Bible Belt in the US. They were wondering, is that true? Is there a Bible Belt? Do people in Louisiana and in Mississippi are more religious than the rest of the US? So they collected hundreds of social media updates and analyzed the language to see if the word church and God and these things would show up more in the Bible Belt versus outside the Bible Belt. So, my friend, this is the Social Studies Toolbox. I hope you start using those 10 tools, including the cool ones like Google Newspaper, interactive maps, doing interviews, doing surveys, and virtually visiting different locations using panoramas. Keep in mind, your students should be collecting data and analyzing this data. And Sarah, I don't know if you want to finish with the conclusion here of some of the other programmings that we have at Logix Academy.
Yeah, I'm just getting them into the chat, and I know the link on one of them is broken, so I'm going to see if I can fix that. No. All right, I will work on that. Oh, I know what's happening. It's not actually getting the full link. So just let me grab that. So yeah, everyone, this was amazing, Dominic. And if you want to see more fantastic programming like this, please do check out what we have going on. If you go to the event builder and Logix Academy events, you can see what we have going on throughout the year. That includes teacher development and co-taught lessons that we actually run with your students. And it's being updated all the time, so please do check that out. And what I think a lot of people are going to consider most importantly is there's also a link to our feedback form. And I'm going to grab the functioning link for that one as well and drop that in for you so you can click it, because if you can take 5 minutes to fill this out, we really appreciate it. It helps us out so much, but you also get yourself entered into the prize draw for the fabulous prizes that we have today for your attendance. And we want to say again, thank you so much for taking the time out of your weekend to meet with us and to do this professional development. Dominic, it was a real treat to see all of these things. And some of these were completely new tools to me, and some of them were just using them in ways I'd never thought of before. And that was absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure everyone else appreciates that just as much as I do.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you have a great day with all the other workshops that you're going to explore today at the Google Summit.